WLR, IMRO Local Station of the Year. WLR.
Hello and welcome to the wonderful Granville Hotel in the heart of Ireland's oldest city. We're here with 6 of the 11 candidates vying for your vote in the general election to be held this Saturday across this fair land. The debate's been recorded on Tuesday evening, being broadcast on Wednesday morning, and the previous day the other 5 candidates had their chance to talk. Bird's eye make waffles. There'll be no waffling here tonight. You'll get a bird's eye view though of proceedings as it's been recorded for the web, and we'll be delving deep into the psyche of the county as we deliver questions to feed the candidates. And those candidates that we have here this evening are Ronan Cleary from Ain 2, David Cullinane from Sinn Féin, John Cummins from Fine Gael, Una Dunphy, People Before Profit, Eddie Mulligan, Fianna Fáil, and Marc Ó Cathasaigh from the Green Party. So, we're going to get straight into the matter. We do try to be positive. We want to see Waterford rising. Speaking to a man only a half an hour ago, Greg Feasey, nearly in tears. 26 years in business, announced last night closing down. Can't be here tonight. Speaking to some other business people. The city centre. Let's focus on that straight away. What are you doing for the city centre? Have you been pushing people out of the city centre? Arundel Square, like a ghost square. The town becoming a ghost town. VAT at 23%. VAT on services gone from 9 to 13%. People that have to sell cups of coffee in Dungarvan and elsewhere. 8% penalties regarding rates not paid. The lack of progress on the North Quays is a killing business sentiment. Eddie Mulligan.
I suppose, Damien, from my own point of view, I've been a very strong advocate of the city centre back even before I went into politics. As regards driving the city forward, I was one of the people who worked for Business Group who looked for a city centre management group to look and drive on the city. I sit on that city centre management group. We've made lots of improvements over the last 6 to 7 years, but those improvements aren't good enough at the moment. And in relation to the city centre, I am probably one of the most vocal. You're 100% right in relation to Arundel Square.
What improvements have you made?
What improvements have been made? I'll start straight off in relation to when I first went into politics in 2014, people were saying the city was unsafe, there was a lot of antisocial behaviour in the city, a lot of theft, a lot of drugs use. I lobbied extensively for 2 years till I got a meeting with the Commissioner through the Minister, whereby at that meeting with Assistant Commissioner Eugene Corkin, we had 10 extra guards. We were made a priority for guards.
Let's focus on business. I haven't mentioned crime, so let's focus on business.
Yeah, but that's one of the biggest issues in crime. I've had to actually host 2 workshops in the city centre this year in relation to representations from crime, on crime from business within the city centre. Come back then in relation to the public realm. In 2014 when I got elected, I lobbied hard for we connect the Viking Triangle to the city centre. We now see that public realm coming to an end. However, I do admit if you look in 2012, 2013, Michael Street had 50% vacancy. You come back at the moment, the most recent figures would show of the 49 shops down there, 20% of them are vacant, so we're slipping back down, which is through low disposable income, low footfall. And just to discuss Arundel Square, I personally was responsible, through probably Chow O'Neill's not here, for nearly 12 months lobbying to get the engineers on a tour of the city centre. We still, 12 months later after that tour, are waiting for decisions from the engineers. In my own submission,
just say that to get the engineers on a tour of the city.
Yes.
These are the engineers that work in the city.
100%, because I'll give an
example. To get a tour of their city centre, to get them to go from City Hall up to Arundel Square.
Yes, because they weren't understanding the issues we were saying in the chamber. And if I come back to Arundel Square, I made an extensive 6,000 words.
Shocking.
6,000 word submission, and I personally did not want Arundel Square closed to traffic. When we were voting on it, the compromise was that it would be closed to traffic after 11 o'clock, it would be kept open till 11. But I and some other councillors are lobbying heavily that we really need to open up Arundel Square.
Did you vote for a rates increase in the last budget in the council?
I voted for a rates increase with the qualifying that anybody under rates of 5,000 would have a rebate at the end of the year, which included 75%. Now, I will tell you, in discussions behind closed doors, I worked on the Fianna Fáil budget, which included, it was a rates-free budget, taking money with the same outrun as last year. Some of my colleagues here worked on it. We were 2 votes short of getting that budget passed. There's no point in presenting a budget if you're not going to get it over the line.
But you did vote for a rates increase. What would you have to say to Greg here tonight, if Greg was here tonight? Look in his eyes and say, you believe totally that you've done enough for Waterford City Centre?
No, I've done as much as I can do as a local councillor. We have lots of other challenges that we need to get to national level to actually bring the focus on Waterford City Centre. Waterford City Centre has hugely been underinvested in. And I give it to you, even if you look at the North Quays, and one of the preconditions of the North Quays is that the shopping centre must go ahead in the Michael Street development. And in relation to that shopping centre going ahead, most of the people I've engaged with trying to attract them to Waterford City Centre, the biggest thing I get, one is the low disposable income. That can only be worked at national level. The second thing I get is the footfall in relation, and the third thing is that we don't have spaces big enough. So for the North Quays development to go ahead, the condition is that Michael Street must go ahead.
Okay,
and I've been an advocate that must go ahead to bring the
We'll talk about that in a minute. If you're holding the microphones up, just hold them fairly close to your mouth, okay? David, I'm going to come to you back in a second. Comment here, name and title, please.
Des Person, local auctioneer. Councillors, I'm trading in Arundel Square for 26 years. What you allowed happen Arundel Square is a stain on all of you, because it is people-less, footfall-less, and it's nothing compared to what it was. There may have been some highfalutin ideas of what you were doing with pedestrianisation and the rest of it, but lads, you've got it wrong. And I'm saying that as somebody who's there for 10, 12, 14 hours a day, 5, 6 days a week. And it's a shambles. And it's all of you, because all of you, those of you who are councillors, accept some of the responsibility for that, because frankly, it has failed. And I'm saying that as somebody who's in there for a living for 26 years.
Des, could I just make one qualifying? I completely agree with you. I lobbied for but I come back to the Apple Market. The majority of councils wanted the Apple Market closed to actually traffic. Okay. And we had to bring 13 councils up to sit outside the Casbah and look at traffic passing to get the message across. We needed to keep the Apple Market open, to keep vibrancy in the city.
David Cullinane, did you give out about Arundel Square? Did you make any representations to say that the business people are actually saying what needs to be said and it's a complete shambles? Have you actually instructed the councillors working on the council for your party to do something about this?
Well, first of all, I don't instruct my councillors. They're their own people, and obviously they have their own approach to how they work on Waterford City and County Council. The first thing I want to say is that I don't think anybody here on the panel can say we've done enough collectively when you look at where Waterford City and County is at. And Greg Feasey is a friend of mine. I know him. I know Lisa, who worked in the shop for many years. There are many, many people like Greg whose shops have closed over the last number of years. And one of the reasons for that is because footfall is down and people don't have enough disposable income to spend in Waterford City Centre. There is, of course, a huge opportunity awaiting this city with the North Quays. We all want to see it happen, but we have far too many low-paid jobs. We haven't seen anything like the investment into Waterford that we need to create quality jobs, well-paid jobs, and then people having the money.
Okay,
you can have your view on Arundel Square.
Yeah, I want to ask you, do you
views.
think traffic should be allowed to go through Arundel Square?
No, I don't, and I have a different view to Des, and I've spoken to Des and other people on this several times.
So do you think Arundel Square is good at the minute?
That hasn't come up once on the doors over the last.
Because there's nobody living there.
Damien, let me finish for a second. You didn't interrupt Eddie when he was making his point. I'm standing in this election campaign on my record as somebody who has stood up for Waterford. Last year, the council funding was cut by 14.5 million over 5 years. That wasn't done by Sinn Féin. I want to see Waterford City develop. I want to see the investment. I want to see the quality jobs. I've worked with retailers. I've worked with people like Greg, and it breaks my heart to see their shops close because people lose their jobs as well. I have a different view to some people on this panel on how we address and how we solve all of these problems. And we do it by having people sent to the Dáil, and indeed people in government, ministers who understand the needs of Waterford and once and for all can get things done. If I can just finish on this point on this issue, Damien, and I said this to you recently. I first voted in an election when I was 18 years of age. And I remember when I voted in that election, I listened to a debate. And the politicians at the time were talking about a university. They were talking about the airport. They were talking about Waterford City Centre. They were talking about the North Quays. And none of that has been delivered. 25 years ago that was, and none of it has been delivered.
Okay.
I want to be somebody in government who can actually start delivering
and
making things happen for people like Greg and for small retailers who want us to make things happen for them and their city.
Okay, can I come in there now?
But yet you're going to raise taxes on businesses, David, and what further effect is that going to have on
We're
them?
going to talk about taxes. We're going to talk about business tax. If you want to speak, hold out the microphone.
If you could name the business tax you're talking about.
David, you're talking about increasing taxes on SMEs and
We're
on,
not.
on
Name it.
corporations.
No, we're not.
Look at your
No, we're not.
manifesto, David.
We're not.
I
This
have.
is the-
Have
we
you
want-
looked at it?
Okay,
Have
we'll
you looked at your own manifesto?
we have a section.
have,
We're
and-
going to have a
and-
section on taxes in a minute. I want to come straight to Marc Ó Cathasaigh from the Greens.
Just one quick point.
Just one second,
quick point,
Eddie.
Damien.
No, 1 second. Marc Ó Cathasaigh on the Greens. Do you want to see traffic going through Waterford city centre, parts that have been pedestrianised, or do you think the pedestrianisation is the right way to go?
I think one of the successes of Waterford City over the last few years is the quality of our public realm. Our public realm.
What do you
and
think
the
of Arundel
pedestrianisation.
Square?
Arundel Square, the problem with footfall in Arundel Square is less to do with the lack of traffic and more to do with the vacancy rates on Arundel Square. So we haven't seen Weatherspoons open, we haven't seen any movement there. We have a vacant unit in City Square, a very large one. The City Arms as it was, the Alfie Hale store, all of those are still closed. At the moment, there's not a good reason for somebody to walk into Arundel Square. I do think those things will be addressed, but I do also think that we need to keep in mind that cars don't spend money, it's people who spend money. And we know that pedestrianised areas are much better. Now, when we look at things like disruptive technology around the internet, for example, we know that more and more people are coming to cities for experience. They're doing a body of their shopping at home. When they come to the city, they want to have the experience of being in the city. And I think a pedestrianised area, I think if we think back to the Harvest
are you
Festival
basically
and the
saying
success of Arundel Square during that shows us the potential. But then
Are you effectively
certainly
saying businesses such as Greg Feezy's and other businesses, there's another business that I know in trouble, are you saying that they should basically say, shut up shop, lads?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is to attract people into the city centre now, when they have the option of online shopping, you need to increase the quality of the city centre experience.
Nobody's
and
doubting
the value
that.
of our public realm and the quality of our public realm in Waterford, which I actually think is second to none across Ireland. Now, I know we have vacancy rates and we have issues. We have huge issues around disposable income, and we have huge issues around the quality of employment. We have huge demographic issues in that we lose people in their late 20s to early 30s because of the university issue. All those issues are there. But I don't think that reversing pedestrianisation is the way forward.
Okay, I want to bring the other candidates in a second. We have a gentleman here. What's your name, please?
Wilbur Shaw, Waterford Taxi Association. Well, I believe that the traffic should be allowed to go through Arundel Square because what's happening in Arundel Square is disgraceful because there's no footfall there because people, when they come out of shops, they want to be able to get into their cars or they want to be dropped off in the cars so they can get home. And there's nothing there for them. There's nothing in the Arundel Square for them. And I think it's disgraceful that the way the Arundel Square was made a pedestrian. And then you want cars to come down Parker Street, go down Lady Lane and down into Colbert Street and block up the whole city and nowhere for them to go when they get down Colbert Street. And you're talking to me then about traffic, and you take all your commissions in Waterford. Now, I had to ask to come here this evening to represent the Waterford Taxi Association and the Irish Taxi Council. And we're never invited to anything that's going on in Waterford. And we know more about what's going on in Waterford than anyone. And that's my opinion. Yes, Arundel Square should stay open.
Are any of these politicians, are you looking for them to inspire you?
Yes, well, I want politicians to get off the high horse and say they're there to represent, they're voted in by the people of Waterford, not by their parties. And this is the problem we have in Waterford. The party, and not about the people that voted for them to put them in the position they're in.
Do you feel let down?
Yes, big time.
Angry?
Angry, very angry. I'm angry about a lot of things within the taxi industry. The taxi industry, we were, Fianna Fáil, or Fine Gael and Labour took our pension fund away from us when they stopped us from selling our taxi plates that we have to be put down in a hole in the ground before we can pass on our taxi plates. Do you think that's right? But you didn't do away with your own benefits when you lose your jobs as a TD or a councillor. You didn't do away with them, but you done away with the taxis benefits for allowed to be selling on their taxi plates.
Ronan Cleary, Ain2.
Thank you, Damien. I was canvassing in Dungarvan yesterday and I canvassed the main square, but I also went off the main track and I talked to a couple of shop owners there, and they said to me that the main reason for business failure or businesses not doing as good as it could do was rates, insurance and the lack of footfall. That was actually what they were saying. They're the three top things that they listed. The rates that they had to pay, the business rates that they had to pay, also the insurance that they were liable for people who could make a claim from tripping up over a curbstone directly outside their premises or for spilling a cup of coffee on themselves. The insurance rates that they had to pay on a yearly basis were prohibitive. But also the footfall. The footfall, we need to attract people into the city centre and also to Dungarvan town centre. A way to attract people into the city centre would be actually to move faculties from WIT into the city centre, therefore bring in students who would spend money, coffee, who would buy their trainers, who would buy their sports gear, who would buy their groceries. We need to increase footfall into the city centre and including into Arundel Square. And also, I think banning cars from certain sections of the city, it doesn't make sense. Cars and pedestrians can also go side by side. They have different engineering styles, like they do in the Apple Market, where cars slow down and they pass cheek by jowl with pedestrians. Like this gentleman says, taxis are also the heartbeat of the city in that they pick up people who come and go from shopping. And taxis also pay their rates. We need taxi drivers, and they also pay their PAYE and USC charges. So it's part of the trickle-down effect of increasing footfall in the city.
John, I want to come to you in a second. I want to ask people before profit, what would you do to make things different in the city centre?
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for pedestrianised areas, but I think we've definitely gone a step too far without thinking of the whole idea of promoting cities and being progressive in cities. Orla Hegarty on the Irish Times today, she's from the School of Architecture in Dublin, had a very good article about how our beautiful cities attract people, business and lots of footfall. But I think what we need to do before you pedestrianise areas, you have to think about how you're going to get the people in there. And one of the main things there is busing them in, that you have to have public transport to get people in if you're going to have a pedestrianised area. You have to be able to not have a ghost town-like image, which is what you see often on Sundays in the middle of town, that you can't have us turning into something like Thurles, which is immediately what I thought when I heard about Gregory's shutting down last night. And it's terrible to see our small and medium enterprises shutting down like that. We can get money from multinationals that are here. Many of them pay zero tax, and that's what we would be targeting.
Would you increase, Una Dunphy, taxes on businesses? Like, you wouldn't be seen as a pro-business party.
Well, I think we have to, balance that between the multinationals and your grassroots businesses that are in towns. We need to have businesses that are in cities. We need to have the small and medium enterprises that give us our shops that are local and give us employment for those locals and treat people in a fair way, rather than the situation we have had from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, where the multinationals do not pay their fair share. And what we'll end up with is the likes of Nero's, the likes of Costa, and we'll have none of our own coffee shops. We'll have nothing else. Would you let
cars go through Arundel Square?
At the moment, I would.
Okay.
At the moment, until we build up public transport to the situation where they'll bring enough people in, which is what we should be working on.
John Cummins, Fine Gael. John, did you vote for a rates increase?
Look, firstly, what I would say...
Just on that specific one.
Damien, there was any business that pays rates of €5,000 or less will have no increase, which, importantly to point out, is 75% of all ratepayers in Waterford. Okay. We had a very difficult budget, as people will know, that we had to pass this year. The alternative was the CEO's budget, which was 5% of a rates increase across the board for all businesses. And the Sinn Féin proposal was to leave the council be abolished and leave a commissioner come in, and in that case you would have had a 5%.
Okay, so you did vote for it.
So we brought forward proposals in consultation with other parties, and Eddie, I did work personally with Eddie, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, in order to try and bring forward proposals in order to minimise those, and then we had to obviously work with Labour, Greens and Independents, and all parties and independents bar Sinn Féin came on board to pass a budget.
So you're basically saying that it had to be done, just one of those things had to be done with no other choice. We're not left with any choice. Can I ask you a specific question then? Has the lack of progress on the North Quays killed business sentiment in the city centre?
I definitely think it has had a stagnation effect on the city centre. I would agree with that, and all you have to do is look at the new boxes in City Square that have been developed and have layin idle now for going on 18 months. And the reason for that is it's not that the bigger retailers don't want to come to Waterford. The simple fact of the matter is they're waiting to see what the situation is with the North Quays. So
they're not only
we
waiting
are
for the
making-
North Keys. There's
we are
one
making progress on that, as you know, Damien,
Okay.
and I have spoken to you
Yeah,
as
no, and
recently
we're
as
going to
yesterday in
go
relation to
specific
that.
onto that now in a second. Eddie, you want to come in for a quick second?
Just quickly, there's one big item here in Waterford that seems to be getting ignored at national level, and that is the levels of unemployment, the low levels of disposable income. Even for those knocking on the doors, it's one of the biggest representations being made is the unavailability of jobs. But just to home in, to give you an idea of the lack of disposable income, the average household income, according to the 2016 census in Waterford here, 2016 census
16.
is roughly €106 a week per household,
2016.
lower than the average household income throughout
We're
the rest
in
of the country.
2020 now.
Yeah, 2016, and I would say it's
Eddie,
actually
you
worse at the
also-
moment.
You also have to
Do you know
acknowledge.
do you know the current figures?
You also have to acknowledge.
Do you know the
Damien,
current
that there
unemployment
has been a
figures?
27%.
I have them here if you want me to remind you.
27% increase in Enterprise Ireland jobs and a 34%
But come back to
increase
Waterford.
in IDA
Look at the live
jobs
register for
in
December.
Waterford.
Look at the live register
and
for
they're
December at the
well-paid
moment.
jobs.
This gentleman wants to talk to us. What's your own name, please?
Edmund Phelan.
And do you represent anybody?
Actually, ICSA cattle organisation.
Okay.
Just one point here. I think it's a disgrace that in a city this size, there's one multinational has 4 huge retail outlets on the suburbs with free parking. I came here tonight, had to put a fiver in the machine or I get clamped. I think you should have free parking in the city centre. It would be a start. And give homegrown industry or shops a chance.
Okay, we're going to come back to that now in a second. I want to ask very, very specifically, because this is really important, okay? John Cummins, has the government committed to funding the North Quays, or is it just Fine Gael? And can you be quite specific in your answers, please?
Fine Gael have committed 110 million of the infrastructure funding. The government, in terms of the civil servants, have also agreed the figure of 110 million, but the percentages in terms of which department pays what hasn't been finalised. So that is the Department of Transport and the Department of Housing and Local Government.
So you're saying the government. Has this gone to Cabinet?
No, it has not gone to Cabinet.
So, effectively, it's a Fine Gael minister, Owen Murphy, making promises.
No, that's not what it is, Damien.
If it hasn't gone to Cabinet, it hasn't been signed off on by the Cabinet, and that effectively still makes it a promise.
No, what it is the government have committed 110 million.
Tell me the difference between a commitment.
Well,
tell me the difference between a commitment and a promise.
At the moment, Damien, the percentages are being worked out between the Department of Transport and Housing and Local Government. Under the URDF, which sits with the Department of Local Government and Housing, we have had a €6 million allocation, and there is a 50% acknowledgement from them that they will fund 50%. Ultimately, what's going to happen here, in my opinion, is housing and local government will fund 80% and transport will fund 20%.
So it's still only, let's just be quite specific on this. After 3 years when this was announced, and we've had 4%
we
inflation
still do not
each
have
year,
a planning
and we still had 4% inflation a year, 12 million a year, 36 million has been added to the cost already. The lack of anybody driving this project on, taking it by the horns and saying, let's get this done. The prevarication and the lack of the government actually putting its money where its mouth is has led to this situation that we effectively still only have promises.
No, you're wrong in your assertion there, Damien. And why
what's wrong about what I've just said?
What's wrong is there has been 6 million allocated and more money from the National Transport Authority, and we do not require a further drawdown of funding until Q4 of this year and going forward over the next 4 years. So that has been finalised in terms of the 110, as I have stated, but what has to be worked out, finalised, is the percentages between both departments. But that's why we need strong representation.
That's why we need
here
strong
in
representation.
Waterford.
And
that's
there's
why we need somebody who has
Coffey,
been involved
okay,
in this project and who has pushed it to the forefront and has spoken to the minister,
Coffey pushed it to
spoken
the
to
forefront.
the
He
Taoiseach.
wasn't at the meeting where Owen Murphy discussed this with David Cullinane and another number of deputies. Neither was John Deasy.
I believe he wasn't invited.
David Cullinane.
Well, first of all, I don't score points on important issues like this, and I first of all, I don't doubt whatsoever.
You think what I'm doing is scoring points,
No,
David?
I wasn't talking about you. I was actually talking about Damien. Right. So what I was going to say was, I don't doubt your sincerity when it comes to the North Quays, and I don't doubt the government's sincerity. So I think you just need to listen, first of all, John. You don't always have to jump in and jump to conclusions.
Look, David,
so
I'm a passionate person. I'm a passionate person. I'm passionate about Waterford.
I'm making specific points.
The people listening to this programme have heard a lot from John over the last 20 minutes.
You now have the microphone. Why are you accusing me of scoring points?
There are a number of guests on this panel, and we all should be given the opportunity to make our points. In relation to the North Quays, and I'll get to it very quickly.
I love the way you're moderating this. I really, really like it, David. I really appreciate it. I'm sure the audience. Do you like what he's doing, lads? Yeah, it's really good, isn't it? Fire ahead, David.
And thank you for that, Damien. Now, if I can continue to make my point.
Certainly.
The North Quays is a big, big opportunity for the people of Waterford, and we all have to do what we can to get it over the line. I met with Secretaries General and I met with ministers on this to play my part to try and get the funding. You are right in saying that at this point in time, that funding is not fully secured. There's commitments, yes, but it's not fully secured. That is correct. What we need to do, though, and people listening to this programme, Damien, want to know, this is a national election to form a government. They want to know what we're going to do for the next 5-10 years for this city. I want to see the North Quays developed, but I also want to see the homes that people need. We don't have a living city. So when we're looking at the North Quays, let's make sure that we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, where you can go through Waterford city centre at night and it's a ghost town. I want to see the hospital properly resourced. I want to see all of the social infrastructure, the public transport. What we need are politicians in Waterford that can look at what does this city and county need over the next 5 and 10 years, understand those needs, and then get the infrastructure that we want. I want to be one of those politicians. I can stand on my record over the last 5 years, and what I'm doing in this campaign, and when I'm on doors talking to people, Damien, is to talk about the future of Waterford,
and you
what's
ran
possible,
out,
and what we can deliver.
You ran out of that meeting with Owen Murphy and rang our radio station and rang our programme straight away to say this is going to happen. So now you're saying that it's still only a promise.
No, what we got from the minister at the time was a commitment that...
Do you disagree with my statement?
No, what we got from the minister at the time, Damien, was a commitment to fund the part of moving the train station under the Urban Regeneration and Development Fund. What's missing from the government, and what has been missing, is the multi-annual funding which is necessary, so that this isn't going to be funded over 1 year.
That has been committed, David. That has been committed, and you know that has been committed.
Okay, I'm going to ask
you. You know that has been committed, and I think it's disingenuous to say that it hasn't.
Eddie Mulligan.
Damien, one of the most important things for the North Quays, it's a condition that the new Michael Street, New Street development will be drawn on, and we need to attract those bigger 5,000 square foot retail units to Waterford. And in discussions, they're all waiting, as someone said, they're all waiting for them to drive on. They're also looking at the low disposable income rates. But the facts of the matter are, the application went in September 2018. We got €6 million as being a key enabler for Waterford City Centre under National Planning Framework. But also we were expecting 13. 7 million went to Kilkenny for the Abbey Quarter, which isn't mentioned in one line within the National Planning Framework. And then you take it on to 2019, where the city is hugely economically challenged. We got zilch. And I'll go back, we're talking about meetings there. Pascal O'Donoghue came to Waterford City and County Council, and I was actually embarrassed by how few councillors turned up to that meeting. I personally asked him, would he give a financial commitment to Waterford in relation to the North Quays? He failed to give the commitment, and his language was used if and when it happens.
Many times are the two words North Quays mentioned in the Fianna Fáil manifesto?
They're not mentioned in the Fianna Fáil manifesto.
Why? That is a very serious issue.
No, in the Fianna Fáil manifesto,
can you answer my question?
We didn't.
Why?
Why is it not mentioned? Because there's
it's
projects
not a
up and down the
priority,
whole. It is a priority, and it for me as a Fianna Fáil councillor and as a Fianna Fáil general election candidate, it is one of my priorities. Not only the North Quays.
Why did you not ensure that it was in the Fianna Fáil manifesto? Because I ensured it was in the Fine Gael.
24/7 is also our priority. Affordable and social housing is our priority. I could come right across Technological University here in Waterford, based with the headquarters here in Waterford.
Do you know why the North? Are you disappointed it's not in it?
I'm not disappointed it's not in it, because I've been in the Fianna Fáil headquarters and I've been told that we're actually assured that they will be supporting everything that's in the National Planning Framework, which I put a lot of work into National Planning Framework. It is a key enabler for Waterford, and Fianna Fáil has stated to me, we will support all urban renewal development funding that's approved.
You're
so
not
Fianna Fáil will
to
be supported to
Project
go
Ireland
forward.
2040.
But I tell you, Damien, you said something very earlier.
You
said something earlier that's very true there. You said there's no champion of the North Quays. I 100% 100% agree with you. I want to be the champion of the North Quays. I also want to be the champion
you
of the
should have got it in your
unemployed.
manifesto.
Well, why is it not in it?
Because in the manifesto, there's
I ensured it was in the Fine Gael one.
Yes, and do you know why it was ensured it was in the Fine Gael one?
Because we're committed to it.
To hide the fact that you
Because
didn't.
we're committed
to hide
to
the
it.
fact you didn't give any funding, and you didn't.
We're
And you
committed
didn't
to it.
confirm a funding structure for the CEO of Waterford Council, and we in Waterford Council have spent 12 million plus on that project. Waterford Council are committed to it, and Fianna Fáil and myself as a general election candidate.
Fianna Fáil are not committed to Project Ireland
Yes,
2040.
I wouldn't be.
If you want me to
sitting
moderate
here
again,
then.
Damien, I can come in anytime.
Thanks very much. I'll let you. It's okay. You can. You can stand up here, David. It's fine. Marc Ó Cathasaigh, when you hear Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael rowing like this, what do you have to say?
Well, I'd prefer
Are you
to
in
speak
favour
to
of
the
the
North Quays rather
Are
than
you in
Fianna
favour of the
Fáil,
North
Fine Gael.
Quays development?
Yes, and while there might be more political capital in it to spin some sort of a doomsday narrative, I actually think, and give John his due on it, I do think funding is just there and will get over the line. And I think
What
it's
do you
going to
think
be
about something that's
transformative.
not written down? Like, it's one thing for somebody, a minister, to say, yes, lads, I'm going to give it to you.
Yeah.
the
No, I
government,
look,
like, if
I
this
see
was-
where you're coming from, but I suppose my best information, and I've been talking to people behind the scenes, I think the North Quays is happening. I think in Waterford we're desperate for fearing the worst, and maybe because of precedent, it would certainly be more popular for me to rail against it. Now, I would like to have seen the North Quays funding secured a long time before now, because there has been Waterford's been a city holding its
everybody
breath.
wanted to see that.
Waterford is
Yeah.
a city holding its breath.
I know.
But I do think that the funding is going to be secured, and I'm quite confident as well that any of the people at this table who are elected will fight tooth and nail for
Can I
that
make one
funding
small
to be.
point just on the North Quays? Just take 30 seconds. I think what the developers are worried about, because I spoke to somebody close to that development in recent times. In fact, I think he contacted us all. They are concerned about what happens if there's a change of government, and will there be a change in policy. I gave them a very clear, unequivocal commitment that if Sinn Féin is in government, we will deliver the funding which John says is there, and I think Fianna Fáil have as well, and other parties. So I don't think if there's a change of government that the North Quays project is in any difficulty or danger.
And just specifically on things being written down, so it would be true to say it's not mentioned in our manifesto as well,
Correct.
which is why I got into Eamon Ryan's ear about it. And if you read the News and Star or the Munster Express today, the Green Party leader committed also to the funding.
Yeah,
in
but
the
you should have done that a month ago before the manifesto
Be
was
that
printed.
as it may, I picked up the phone.
But why didn't you do it a month ago?
Well, I had to read the manifesto first, I suppose. But he was
Do you
contacted.
not have an input of what goes into your manifesto?
I do have an input, and there's several lines in it that are written by me. I would have liked to have seen it in clearer, but when I saw the issue, I made sure it was rectified.
Okay.
So
This gentleman here-
Is it clear that the only party that has it in their manifesto is Fine Gael?
Yes, as a promise.
And it is
promise.
happening.
Who
It's
are
like-
also the only
it's like-
party
but
who
we-
could
it's
have delivered it
it's
over
like
the
going
last
into a
4
nightclub
years.
to say you're in a
This
promise.
is- But we
Doesn't
still-
mean you're-
we
doesn't
still
mean
didn't
you're
get any
gonna score.
confirmation of funding
Let's
from
not
Fine
peddle the
Gael.
negativity here. This is happening.
Right, this gentleman here, please.
It's not negativity, it's
What's your own
facts.
name?
Paul O'Reilly. I'm a teacher here in Waterford, and I'm a member of the ASTI. And I'd just like to compliment, I suppose, the candidates here in front of us today for, having the bravery, I suppose, it is to put yourself in front of the electorate and to, put yourself out there. And I think that has to be recognised, Also to thank WLR for putting this event on today, for the people of Waterford to have an opportunity to listen on air to what the candidates have to offer. And as I said, I think it's a really worthwhile exercise. I suppose I wanted to bring a bit of good news to the table here today, and it's the fact that people have overlooked the biggest resource that Waterford has. And I say this as a Cork man, so I can stand over it as an observer from the outside.
Just get to your point, if you wouldn't mind, please, sir.
Yes, of course. So the biggest resource that Waterford has is its people. I think that's anybody here today at the table or listening at home on the radio can tell you that Waterford is a very proud city. It's the country's oldest city, fantastic history, fantastic tradition, proud of its heritage, proud of what it has to offer. Therefore, it's quite clear that what people need to be back in here, it's okay, the North Quays, whatever, that's all very interesting, but it's the people that need to be backed, okay? And as a teacher, I have the privilege of being inside in the classroom every day. I can see what's in front of me, and there's fantastic potential.
And the point is...
and I'm coming to it, Damien,
yeah, thank you.
The point is, I'd like to ask the people here today, what is your position on investment in education? I just finished up the question. I'm asking the question because in the OECD league table of investment, Ireland ranks number 30 in a list of 30. We're down at the bottom in terms of our education. We go around telling ourselves how great we are, what we have to offer, our fantastic knowledge-based economy. Waterford needs a knowledge-based economy. There's no point in talking about the past. The future is the people. The future is investment. What's your position on investment?
Okay,
Thanks very much.
I'm going to go straight to Una Dunphy and to Ronan Cleary on this. Una.
Well, the most obvious one, I suppose, is the university status for Waterford, because it's great having marvellous young people, but then when they come to third level, they can either afford to leave or take a limited amount of courses. So we would be committed to expanding on the courses that are available so that people within the southeast aren't negatively impacted because of the region they live in and because of their socioeconomic status. But I suppose also with the day that's in it, and the TUI have been on strike 11 years after it was imposed upon them, the pay inequality, I would have been a strong advocate for taking this away and reducing any of the FEMPI legislation that was imposed on people within the emergency. We were told we're now in recovery, yet these impositions are still there, and they're grossly unfair. And I believe ASTI are re-looking at what they're going to do in that aspect also. It would be useful if all three unions came together and did act on that. But tomorrow we also have childcare workers going out, and they're going out on strike because of the lack of funding for childcare. And we're very strong on advocating for 33 hours per week for childcare, based on 3% of your income to start with.
And to do all that, you're going to raise taxes.
We're going to raise taxes. We're going to raise taxes in a variety of ways.
Are you going to bring in a third rate of tax for people earning more
I think
than
we have 5 rates of tax.
Okay.
So there
anybody
are
earning more than 70,000, how much will they be paying in tax?
I haven't got the figures in front of me at the minute, but it is a progressive taxation to bring us in line with what happens in other countries in Europe. So I think what's important with regard to taxation as well is the money that people earn, and we've seen Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael only give a pittance to the minimum wage. We would bring it up to €15. But getting back to childcare,
I'm surprised you don't know the tax rates.
Are you? I suppose I focus more on the lower wage and what brings money into people's pockets with regard to people I deal with myself.
Okay, thanks, Una. Ronan Cleary, specifically on education, what this man talks about.
Yeah, no, first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the fantastic work that our teachers do throughout the country. They often do unpaid work. They come in, do the 9 to 4, they do the school day, but often go home and do hours afterwards, marking books, preparing for courses, preparing for classes. So I'd just like to pay acknowledge to that. But also, sometimes I think that is exploited by central government. They see that the teacher is only in the school from 9 to 4, and they know that the teacher has to go home and he or she will be doing marking and preparing classes. With that in mind, I think I know AIM2 will make commitments to reduce class sizes and also reduce teacher-to-child ratios, and ensure that our classrooms are properly supplied with the textbooks, the technology, to basically ensure that all our children get a proper education.
And how are you going to pay for that?
How are we going to pay for that
as well?
No, we're not going to increase taxes on PAYE earners, but we'll ensure that corporations, I think I've mentioned before, the big corporations, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and such like, who are resident in our shores, pay the tax that is due. We have 12.5% corporation tax in this country, and some of these corporations do not even pay that small amount of tax. They get away with 2-3% of tax.
So no increase in taxes on
no
PAYE
increase
workers.
No increase in the corporation tax of 12.5%, but they have to pay it. There's none of these double dealings where they can get away with paying only 2 or 3% of tax and then have offshore company holdings in, say, Holland or the States, and therefore get away with not paying their correct amount of tax.
Before I come back to you, John, I'm going to give you all a chance to come back, and I want to sort of pull the questions in together, okay? So just write down a quick point on it. So this lady wants to say a word. Hello, what's your own name?
Hi, I'm Elaine Walsh. I'm on Dinnabeog Montessori in Dunhill. And Una just mentioned there a minute ago about the early years going out on protest tomorrow. It's the first time ever. And we were talking about secondary school education there a minute ago. I want to know what each parties are going to do if they're elected into government to critically address the serious underfunding of the early years sector in Ireland. You're talking about low and disposable incomes here. We are that sector. We have people on minimum wage who sign on 3 times a year because it's seasonal work. I am an employer, and to be honest with you, if I hear Catherine Zappone once more say that she's not the employer, when she clearly is, she is trying to set our workforce back against the employers. 99% of the income for my early years service is from the government. It's through schemes. Now, I cannot divide out the money they gave me like the loaves and the fishes. I'm not an accountant. I am trying to do my very best. I'm trying to pay the staff that are with me the money that they deserve. But I want to know what you're going to do for the early years sector to address the seasonal work and the low pay and the critical underinvestment in the sector.
John, you can hear the emotion in the voice. You can hear the upset. It was said last night in Dungarvan as well. These people don't go on strike, protests lightly. This is caused by policies that your government is responsible for.
Well, firstly, Damien, I have to acknowledge the fantastic work that is done both at early years and all the way up by the staff, and I think Paul is right. Our people are our greatest asset. We have invested heavily in childcare. We've invested over the last number of years. We've gone from increase from 274 million to over 638 million
John,
this
can I
year
just,
in terms of our childcare. But I acknowledge that that is not being seen by the workers. But we are trying to assist families in terms of their childcare.
Yeah, well, look,
so
you're
yes,
bringing up families there. So let's talk
need
about the National Childcare Scheme that the government introduced. The National Childcare Scheme is not a great scheme. And what you're actually doing is you're taking in child benefit into account when assessing somebody's income. I mean, that's nearly sacrilege to touch the child benefit. You shouldn't be taking that in as a reckonable income. For no other purpose on this island is child benefit taken in as a reckonable income.
Let just John answer that before I go to David.
And I take that point on board, and it is something I think that can be addressed, but you have to also acknowledge that we're trying to introduce a scheme that is a universal scheme that does give to families for the first time in the history of the state, and it is going to take time for that to bed in. You know, with the free preschool places for children, when that was introduced first, there was also teething problems with that, and it is going to take time to bed in. But from what I have picked up from talking to providers on the door and from workers on the door going around all of the county over the last number of weeks, is that we need to have further engagement with the providers, that these schemes are being handed down from on high without the engagement with the providers, and that's something that I think that we can work on.
This lady beside you, what's your own name?
Rena Walsh from Learn Through Play in Johns Park in Waterford. I have a play setting and after school, and I deal with the most vulnerable in our society, amongst others that are working there. You talk about the investment. The investment has increased from 0.1% to 0.2%. We're still bottom of the OECD league. If you take first junior and senior infants out of that equation, you can dig a hole for how low down Ireland are in investment in early years. It's nowhere near what needs to be done. You talk about teething problems with the ECCE programme, and yes, there were. Those teething problems have become a tsunami of problems to us, particularly in the last 12 months. Because while you've increased investment, it's gone into different consultancies, it's gone into different departments, it's gone into different inspection processes, all of which leads to us doing an exasperation amount of paperwork that we can no longer cope with. And that takes from the children that were there. I have families that are now, older siblings have been entitled to the old CCS programme to get free childcare. The parents aren't working or they're not on a scheme, so they're no longer entitled to it. The new NCS programme is geared towards parents and not towards children's needs.
David Cullinane.
Well, first of all, I want to see childcare over time as an extension of primary education. I think that's the philosophy, and that's ultimately where as a state we need to go. In our manifesto, we have proposed an additional €500 million spend on childcare, Damien, to establish two things. One, to properly fund the childcare sector, because what was said by Elaine, and I visited an awful lot of creches, an awful lot of childcare providers and Montessori schools in Waterford over the last number of years, and they are really struggling to keep the lights on, to pay the bills, to pay the staff. And I know an awful lot of staff who work in the childcare sector who've gone through training level 6, level 7, level 8, doing post-diplomas on very, very small incomes. Sometimes not even a living wage. So we want to do two things: reduce the cost of childcare for families. That, of course, is important, but we also need to make sure that the people who work in these centres have decent jobs, because I know many of them who can't afford childcare themselves, and they're childcare providers. So we have to get real, we have to make the investments, and that's why we're proposing the additional €500 million investment.
And we are also, Damien. I would like to point that out. And that's why, look, we don't differ on these things. And this is where I think we can work together in order to try and get results for the very childcare providers that are here this
I want to get the others in. Just on that, David mentioned the fact of spending $500 million. To do that, you're going to have to raise taxes. For example, your leader was on the television last night talking about the vacant site levy and saying she's going to raise 107 million from that, wasn't able to explain where it's going to come from. €4 billion extra in tax funding across and above the 11 billion that the Department of Finance has said is available over the next 5 years. The only way that you're going to be able to get that money is to tax people, the majority of whom are on the 35 to 70,000 tax salary. Is that right?
Well, first of all, Damien, I wasn't sure that you were an economist. Our alternative manifesto was...
No, I just did a bit of economics in college.
Yes, but our manifesto was costed by the Department of Finance. That costs every party's manifesto. And what we are calling for is fair taxation. We are not proposing to tax people anymore who earn below €140,000 a year. What we are prepared to do, and if you give me a minute, I will go through the individual proposals. We want the banks who made €2 billion profit last year to start paying their corporation tax. I think that would be fair. We want those who earn over €140,000 a year to pay 5% on income in above that €140,000.
What about the vacant site? What about the vacant site levy?
The doctors that we need to recruit in our hospital.
That brings in €500 million. But you see, if you don't do these
the very
things,
doctors
Damien,
we're looking to recruit.
I didn't interrupt you at all, John. You see, John's message really to people is, let's keep things as they are. We have a housing crisis, we have a health crisis.
I didn't say that, David.
But you're also saying that you're going to put 500
but
million
you're saying you're going to tax
childcare.
the very people that we're trying to
I want to bring the others in
order
can
to
I ask
fix
you a
our
specific,
health service.
sorry, John,
but
can
Damien,
I ask you a specific question on the vacant site levy?
Yes.
107 million you're supposed to be raising from this. And it only raised like a couple of million
last year. And I'm happy
you
asked me that, because Brian Dobson didn't have his facts last night.
Right.
He was working on the basis of an old
and your leader
rate.
didn't have her facts right either.
She did, in fact. And she corrected him twice to say that this was costed by the Department of Finance, not by her. She said, I don't work in the accounting office of the Department of Finance. We want to raise the current rate from 7% to 12%. Brian Dobson was working off figures of 3%, which was a number of years ago, and the number of vacant sites has dramatically increased since then. But that's only one proposal, Damien. There's many more proposals. But can I just make this one final point? And John keeps interrupting every time somebody makes a point about fair taxation. I make no apologies whatsoever for asking people with the deepest pockets to pay a bit more tax to pay for the services that we need, because I don't want to be sitting here in 5 years' time with families still not being able to afford their home, an affordable home, still not having public housing, still not having the resources in the hospital that we need, and still not having the investments in childcare. So either we can talk about these things over and over, or we can make the investments which are necessary.
It is a legitimate question to ask David how Sinn Féin is proposing to recruit the very doctors that we're trying to recruit for UHW when they're proposing to tax them an extra €7,500.
And we'll let David come back and answer that in the question. I want to bring in Eddie Mulligan and Marc Ó Cathasaigh here regarding the ladies here and the upset that they have.
Yeah, no, I totally empathise with them, and having a child myself,
what are you going to do
I know what it's like trying to get good childcare. In relation to the bureaucratics that they talk about and the whole administration nightmare, yes, that needs to be tackled at management level. And I suppose what can you do as a national politician? Certainly you can ask the questions, and certainly you can make sure that the managers implement more efficient administration systems. And that goes right across the current sector at the moment. Even if you go to housing, where the administrational bureaucracy that's required for the council to build houses is anywhere between 2 and 4 years. But come back to what you're saying, Fianna Fáil, within the surplus of 11 billion that's there, I suppose we're looking to give back to actual parents and to childcare. In relation to the National Childcare Scheme, the subsidy for the ordinary everyday workers, we're looking to increase that from 20 to 80 euro. We're also looking to establish a childminders tax credit for the workers, which is up to 2,000 euro for children under 3. In relation to the early childhood care and education system, we're looking to extend that from 38 to 40 weeks. So we're making a commitment within the money that's available there. And I suppose as a national politician, I would gladly meet you should I be elected, take your concerns on board, and certainly challenge and fight at national level.
Okay, you've been supporting Fine Gael for the last 4 years, right? Damien Gagan said last night there's too many nodding dogs in the past. Are Fianna Fáil a party of plastic puppies that nod in the back seat of the car looking out the back windscreen that's been driven by Fine Gael towards the cliff?
No, definitely not, Damien. I suppose back when a government needed to be formed and there was ample opportunities for other parties sitting at this table to form a government, Fianna Fáil stepped up to supply a minority government. We were in a supplying confidence arrangement which allowed we were effectively facilitating Fine Gael to drive forward. For example, the 24/7, we would have facilitated Fine Gael to drive forward that. But almost 12 months ago, I certainly wrote to my own party in relation to the issues in Waterford and the South East, saying that we had to bring the supply and confidence arrangement to an end, and then we were facing the whole consequence of Brexit and where it had to be extended for another year. So I certainly wasn't in favour of the supply and confidence being extended beyond the 3 years, but certainly we facilitated a minority government is what we did.
Can I ask you, as you're going to answer that question, Marc Ó Cathasaigh, do you support the building of more roads?
And that's very, very separate from an education question. And I can come back to it, and I'll be delighted to answer it. But I do want to come back to Paul's question, which was asked some time ago. Paul, you probably know I'm an INTO member, and so I was supporting the TUI action today. I just want to give, and Damien, you asked earlier about whether people had input into their manifestos. Now, the education section is one of the parts of the Green Party manifesto that I would have had significant input into. Reducing the pupil-teacher ratio, that primary and secondary school, absolutely fundamental. I can provide a much better education if I have 20, 25 children rather than 30 plus, which I'm often facing. Reinstating the school capitation grants to the 2010 levels, because schools have parents' associations fundraising for the toilet roll that's inside in the toilets. You know that well. We should be able to concentrate on providing educational resources, and then SUSI grants. And if I can come over to on the childcare issue,
just hold the microphone up.
I suppose the fundamental thing is we can't run childcare as a business. That it's the wrong model. I wouldn't try to run a primary school as a business. It's wrong. So in the long term, we need to start thinking about moving.
So what are you talking about? Nationalising all the facilities?
I think if the government is committed to providing high-quality healthcare or high-quality childcare, then we have people who are implementing. You're implementing an Asher program. You're implementing a government program in your Etche.
So what are you saying?
Yes, I think we should move to a Nordic model. Now that's in a long term.
Nationalise all the businesses.
I think you should be paying people properly for the work that they're doing, for sure. And I think we should be moving towards a Nordic model. In the short term, however, I think we're going to have to double pre-primary childcare investment over a 2-year period. I know it from, I suppose, both sides of the coin. So I'd have my young fellas in childcare. I know that it's expensive for me to pay for it, but I also know that people who have level 8 qualifications and above, they're not making the money for the work that they're doing either. I know there's people who are working in the childcare setting that we have who are also babysitting at the weekends in order to make ends meet, and I think that's absolutely wrong. People have to be well paid. We've highly qualified, very talented people.
Have you costed this?
It's built into our, so when our pre-budget submission, all of those things.
The nationalisation of all childcare facilities in the country?
No, that's a long-term project. But if you need vision, you need to, if you're taking a journey, you need to know where you're going.
Just before I go to Ronan from Main 2, do you support the draft wind energy guidelines that are out there at the minute?
I would have to look at them in a much more detail than have a question thrown at me from that point of view. But we are certainly behind wind energy.
Have you read the draft wind energy guidelines?
No, I have not.
Why not?
Because
you're a Green Party representative running in a general election, who is proposing renewable resources, and you haven't read the national guidelines that were published 2 months ago?
No, I suppose part of being in party politics, Damien, is I don't need to be an expert in everything.
So wind energy is one of your central
But when I have
tenets.
questions, for example, on wind energy or renewable energy, then I ring Brian Ledden, who's our energy spokesperson. Similarly, if he has questions surrounding education, he calls me on the phone. That's the benefit of being involved in a party structure. I don't need to be expert in everything. We need to be able to share expertise in between us. However, in terms of wind energy, we support wind energy. We support community-owned wind energy in particular. We have proposals that 30% of onshore wind energy should be community-owned so that we're keeping the benefit within communities.
But those guidelines are specific, and you don't know about them, so I won't ask you more about them. Ronan from Main 2. Do you know how many...
No, I was just going to go on about Mr. Mulligan, going on about the...
Going to go on about Mr. Mulligan?
No, about the confidence and supply. The confidence and supply that's been going on for the last 3 to 4 years in this country. Now, Fianna Fáil, we're now at ground zero, I suppose, the 12th hour with regards to the health service, housing supply, childcare facilities, transport, and a number of other issues. Yet Fianna Fáil have been the lapdogs of Fine Gael for the last 3 to 4 years. So much so that Varadkar has insulted Micheál Martin on a number of occasions across the floor of the Oireachtas, yet he has still refused to pull the plug on the government. Even in the UK, with Brexit looming, they had 2 elections. And so to give that excuse as to why the confidence and supply continued and existed doesn't make sense. Now, I would ask people here, if anybody can actually point a difference between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil on a tangible, real basis, I would ask them to explain this to me, because I don't know what it is.
Does any of the candidates know how many diabetic nurses we have in the hospital, the main university hospital, Waterford? Does any of the candidates know how many diabetic dietitians we have? Well, we can't say it's not enough because none of you know. One diabetic nurse in the hospital and no diabetic dietitians. Now we've got a question from the floor. Number of questions that we want to get through very, very quickly because we've only got half an hour left already. It's amazing how time flies when you're having fun. Gentlemen, please, name and title.
Hi, I'm Paddy Massey. I'm from West Waterford, well, originally from Cork. And it's in relation to Damien's comment or question in relation to the draft wind energy guidelines. First of all, I feel it's jumping on Marc on that's probably slightly unfair, seeing is, you know, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have basically been in power for the last 10 years. They're the ones that have sat on the guidelines since 2006 and failed to amend them to take into account the concerns of the communities up and down the, not just Waterford, but the whole country that are being severely impacted by industrial wind turbines. They've now released draft energy guidelines which are out for consultation, and quite frankly, they read like they were written by the developer. So my point would be that when we're in I would like to see, and first of all, I think it's important to point out that the candidates who are currently councillors were very supportive of Blackwater Wind Aware and all of the Waterford Wind groups when it came to proposing amendments to the county development plan to put in protection for certain sites, for putting in setback distances of 10 times the tip height. So my point, or what I would like to ask the candidates is this. Is after you have given us such great support at council level, if you were elected tomorrow or on Saturday, will you continue that support at national level? And if you were in a position where you were making up the next government, would you therefore, seeing as how unfit the new draft guidelines are, call for a moratorium on the construction of all onshore wind farms until such time as proper guidelines that take into account the communities that have been adversely affected by these, this policy are put in place? And just one final point.
Very quickly, please.
We have 3,700 megawatts of installed capacity on the island of Ireland. It has taken 20 years to put that in place. We're talking about putting over 30 gigawatts offshore over the next 30 years on the Atlantic coast and within the Irish Sea. Why are we persisting to torture and torment communities and residents within rural Ireland when the cost of offshore is now on a par with onshore? It seems to be that, sorry John, particularly your guys have been very much developer-led by this and have done very little at national level. I appreciate the support you gave us at council level, But at national level, there has been absolutely no movement whatsoever in supporting the communities.
Okay, I'm going to just cluster a couple of the questions. You can come back and take a question each if you want. This young lady here, she's with Students' Union in WIT. What's your name, please?
So we're Ronan Cleary, WIT Students' Union. So what we want to know is, what are your plans in regard to the funding for higher education? We've heard about secondary level education and early childhood education, but what we want to know is particularly higher education with regard to SUSI. That was cut back in 2011 and hasn't been reinstated. However, the cost of living for students has continuously arose every year since. At the moment, the maximum SUSI grant is not covering students' rent, cost of living, anything like that. Ronan Cleary mentioned earlier in the debate that moving WIT faculties into the city so that students could spend money in the city. Students don't have money to cover their basic cost of living, so how are they meant to have money for discretionary spending?
Okay, I'm going to just take another question down here from this woman, and we'll come back to a few others. Again, I'm just trying to get as many people in as possible so we can get the debate going with the different candidates. Your own name, please?
Trudy McIntyre, Dunmurries, part of the fishing industry. Every coastal member state in Europe recognises the value in Ireland's exclusive economic zone, which is now the largest after the UK's departure from the EU. With this departure, relative stability can be no more. Ireland is in a really strong position to renegotiate for a fairer deal in the next common fisheries policy.
And if you have a specific question, Trudy.
I'm getting to it.
No problem.
So Ireland currently is the smallest percentage share out of that quota in our own waters. If elected, will your party make it a priority to get a better deal for our fishing industry and keep our fishers fishing and rejuvenate our coastal communities? And much like the debates around the country over the last few weeks, the fishing industry was also forgotten in the offshore energy bills. So
it was, yeah.
So
we'll take the microphone over here, please. And as we'll do that, again, you can write down a few of these and take them as we come along in a second. Des pointed out there's a paediatric dietitian as well who deals with diabetes in the hospital. She's not a specific diabetic dietitian, but you're right, Des. I know you're related to her, so be careful with that.
Hi, I'm Michael Fitzpatrick, HSC, SIP2, and on the WIT governing body. Just a quick question. How do the candidates feel about the raising of the pensionable age from the current age up to 67? Where do the parties and the individuals stand?
Okay, and the lady beside you?
Jo Cregan, disability activist. This is a question for John Cummins and Damien Gagan if he'd been here. What was the thinking behind the current government's proposal to cut funding by 20 million for disability services and cutting it for the most vulnerable people in society, yet they somehow found 20 million to assist the FAI? Just want to think of what is your thinking on that?
Okay, and finally, Marion, very good question. Again, there's so many questions.
Marion Amara, Waterford Older People's Council. References in party manifestos of our ageing population are to be welcomed, and particularly so here in Waterford, where according to the census, the last census, 14.9% of the population was aged 65 years or over. After the pensions issue, our next juggernaut hurtling down the road is our increasing older population. Words and manifestos are just that, words. What we need is someone to drive the policies around those words. If in government, and this is for all the candidates, would you support the appointment of a senior cabinet minister for older persons? Also, social inclusion or isolation has been identified by Waterford Social Prescribing Service as a major problem. According to them, 20% of people going to GPs are going because they are socially isolated and not because of medical reasons. Could Marc explain how his party's policies on carbon reduction fit with the growing social isolation, and especially social isolation in rural areas?
Okay, now there's an awful lot to answer there. So what I'm going to do is, if you want to take maybe one of them, whatever you want to answer yourselves, don't take them all, please, because we can't go through them all. John Cummins.
There was a specific question for me from Joe, so if
Yes.
I could address it, and I think it's a very important question, and I think it's very important that it's clarified. There has been no cut in disability. If you can let me finish, Joe, the budget has been increased for disability services to €2 billion in 2020 for the very first time in the history of the state. And before we came in here today, you may not have heard it, but Minister Harris gave a statement in that regard to say that there is no cut of €20 million, and just to say that there will be no cut in frontline outlined services, and if any individual service providers have any concern in that regard, that they're to make contact with the HSE directly, but there is no cut of 20 million euro in disability services,
fair enough,
and
John.
the Minister has clarified it in the last couple of hours.
I printed off today, it's on the website, it's a Fianna Fáil. It actually says that Stephen Donnelly says a proposal cut of 20 million to disability services must be stopped. And this
the Minister has clarified that that is not the case, and the disability services and disability budget has increased to €2 billion in the budget that was passed in November for the very first time in the history of the state.
David Cullinane, you want to come in on one of the specific topics?
Yes, on the third level education, we obviously need a university for everybody here in the southeast, but we also need to reduce costs for people who are going. We want to reduce fees. And we want to abolish them. Previous governments increased them 3 times. On fisheries, we have published a charter on fisheries, which actually came from a number of conferences which we did here in Waterford, listening to fishermen, NGOs and coastal groups as well. And obviously there's the big challenge in relation to what's happening with Brexit. There is going to be a renegotiation of the common fisheries policy. We have to stand up for fishing communities here in Ireland. In relation to older people, there's an awful lot more we have to do. People need to be cared for in the home when they can. They had the respite hours cut, they had home help hours cut. We need to look at the pension. Somebody mentioned the pension age as well, reducing it back to 65. We in Sinn Féin put that on the agenda in this election campaign.
What about in the north?
Brought it in. We wanted reduced.
Do you admit in the north that you'll say 66?
Well, one of the things we can't do is do the British government's job for them. So those rates are set. Those rates are set.
Did you vote in the north to keep the pension age at 66?
No, we did not. What we voted for was the block grant, which comes the actual rates of social welfare rates. And John can huff and puff. You see, this is the thing. I didn't interrupt John once. Every single time I tried to respond, John jumps in. The rates for the old age pension for people in the north, unfortunately, are set in Westminster. Now, I want to see the end of partition. I want to see a united Ireland, but until that comes, unfortunately, those rates are going to be set by Westminster, not by the Assembly, as much as I would want them to be set by the Assembly.
And your party has admitted and said, yes, we voted for 66. So it's a very simple question with a simple answer.
We voted for the block grant.
Which is 66.
No. Those rates, Damien, are set by Westminster. We can't change them. If we could change them, we would. We don't have the power to raise taxes. But the main point the people are listening to this programme are concerned about is, what is David Cullinane and what is Sinn Féin going to do if we were in government? Reduce it to 65, and we're the only clear party in this election to give that clear commitment.
Ronan from Main 2.
Yeah, so if I just go through the points that are made, I think tidal...
Probably not all of them, but one or two of them if you want.
Just regards the wind farms on the south coast, I mean, wind farms aren't the be end and end all. They often involve bird kills, and most of the sparrow and the swallow population coming up from, say, North Africa, come via the Wexford and Waterford coast. So if we put a huge wind farm on the south coast, there would be a large amount of bird kill there. So tidal power... and also tree planting, respecting our hedgerows is also just important as putting these massive wind farms on our land and also on our coast. Regards to the young lady who made the point about students, Ain2 is committed to reducing tuition fees, increasing educational grants, and also greater regulation of properties. And the point I was making about bringing students into the city is that they can get, sometimes students in WIT, they're out in the suburbs and they don't get to know the city as much as they should do whilst they're here studying. And then the last thing I'd just make is I think a senior cabinet minister with regards to older people is a fantastic idea. There wouldn't be any cut in the disability services under an Ain2 government. And finally, I think the common fisheries policy, we have 34% of the territorial waters of the EU, yet only have 4% of the quota. That is completely unacceptable. And if it is an Ain2 minister or as an Ain2 government, if we got into power, we would be back to Brussels in the morning demanding that we get more of the quota under the common fisheries policy.
Would you like to see Ireland leave the EU?
I would not say I wouldn't say that we should leave the EU, but we should be Euro-critical. We should be a Euro-critical party.
So it's not your policy to campaign for Ireland to leave the EU?
No, it's not our campaign. It's not our policy to campaign, but it is our policy to renegotiate the common fisheries policy and also to stay out of a European army.
This gentleman here, I'm going to come to Una and to Eddie. What's your name, please?
Ricky Ryan.
Just hold the microphone right up there.
Sorry, Ricky Ryan. I work with a lot of different drug services in Waterford. I'm a recovering addict, compulsive gambler and alcoholic myself. I'm only 22. But one of the main services that I deal with, work with people between the age of 10 and 22 that suffer with addiction problems. Now, I read your manifestos on a national level, what your plan is. I just want to know what your plan is on a local level, with both young addicts in all fields of life and antisocial behaviour.
Una Dunphy, do you want to see drugs decriminalised that might feed into the problems that society has regarding drugs on a general level?
I do. I think that addicts need to be looked at as a healthcare issue and not a criminal issue. I think we need to look towards Europe and look at the Portuguese model, which is what we are proposing. And our courts are held up constantly with minor infringements with regard to weed and smaller drug doses that people just have for their own personal use. I think that that just clogs up the court system, and it shouldn't be a case where people get criminal records for their whole life because of small possessions.
So do you have would you mind if people were smoking cannabis on the streets?
Well, I think personally you don't see smoking on the streets that much. I think your personal use is your own business as long as you're over 18.
Yeah, but if it's decriminalised, then you can go around smoke it on the streets like they do in Amsterdam.
Well, I think they smoke on the streets of Waterford as it is, Damien. If you use your nose, you'll see that around the city centre. But I don't think that that's a major issue. I think when you get to addiction, you're talking about often more serious drugs. And I think that we need to look at things and have a shift from policing this to having it used as a healthcare issue. But that's something we do locally.
And you wanted to make a point
yeah,
about one of the other things.
I just wanted to make with regard to the pension issue. The pension issue has become a huge issue since we started this campaign. I suppose it was decided some time ago by certain parties who are now saying that they're against it. But SIPTU have been good on it and Unite have been good on it. And I think what has to happen, regardless of who is voted in, we need to have a massive movement against this, because that's the only thing that will drive this to become reversed. And we need to have fair pensions for people who've worked their lifetime. 65 years is long enough, and we will be driving for that to happen with the unions. And I think ICTU should name a date in February for that to happen. But something else that was mentioned as well is that there should have been a €9 increase to stay on track with the government's own for pensioners, and that hasn't happened. So that was something else that was taken from our older generation.
Eddie Mulligan.
Damien, just to come back to two of the questions there earlier, I suppose, in relation to the student union there, so Finney Fall are definitely committed to the education of our youth, and in that respect we're committing 100 million per annum extra towards the higher education. In addition, Susie grant, we're looking at increasing it by 20%, and then in relation to the student assistance grant, we're looking at putting 4.9 million into that, and all that has been costed within I suppose the surplus that's there. Just on fisheries, just on Truda, I'm a former fisheries inspection officer myself, and for me offshore I've seen the amounts of fish that certainly other nationalities have taken from our waters. I was responsible for finding hidden holes with 20 to 25 tonnes. I actually think personally we haven't been strong enough on fisheries at national level and at European level here in Ireland. And in relation to Fianna Fáil, we're fairly comprehensive in our manifesto into actually dealing with it. But two of the things there in relation to inshore fisheries in particular and offshore is we will review the Sea Fish and Maritime Jurisdiction Act, which is, and another thing which I've worked with coastal fishermen here is in relation to prioritising traditional coastal fishing. That's something I brought forward. And last one just on that is in relation to the fishing is that Dunmore East has been underinvested in. When I look at ports like Union Hall, Kilmore Quay, you go up to the West Ross, certainly for me locally and within Fianna Fáil, we're committed to protecting the fishing industry here.
Okay.
And coming back just to Ricky's question there, last one, Ricky, I would know from working with him as a politician on the ground, the Frontline project, which is in for dealing with drug users and from 11 to 20s, bringing them forward. Fianna Fáil, as a part of working with the communities, we're committed to community investment in schemes such as the Frontline project. And me personally, I've lobbied heavily at Fianna Fáil headquarters that we need to be supporting those.
Mark, I'll bring you in a second. I just want Trudy to respond directly to what Eddie had to say there, I think.
Fianna
Hold it right up there, yeah.
Sorry, Fianna Fáil's manifesto, it prioritises traditional coastal fishing communities, and that's great. But then they also turn around and say they drive forward the rapid development and deployment of offshore wind energy by prioritising necessary changes in planning law and licensing regulations. How will that statement protect and prioritise our traditional coastal fishing communities when the National Marine Planning Framework fails to address what everyone would recognise as an essential part of that space, and that's fisheries?
Marc Ó Cathasaigh, I want to bring you in. We haven't been in for a while.
Yeah, thank you very much. So there was a couple of particular things on the pensionable age.
The microphone right up there. Yeah.
I travelled to Dublin for the launch of SIP2 Stop 67 conference. I'm in my role as Green Party spokesperson on social protection. We're fully backing SIP2's position on that. We're of the opinion that retirement has to be optional, flexible, and appropriate, and so we're fully behind SIP2 in that. I wanted to come back, I suppose, just on Ricky's issue. I'd be echoing what Una says. The Green Party feel that addiction is a health issue as opposed to a criminal issue, and I'd support her position on that. Marion, you asked about ageing, and you asked me a specific question as well. So on ageing, I suppose, in general, and social inclusion, we're looking to implement a positive ageing strategy. But your question was around carbon. So I imagine that you're talking about rural isolation and transport and how people get around. So very good. We want to, first of all, we have to retain the free travel scheme. I think Local Link does an absolutely fantastic job of linking those rural communities together, and I think that should be heavily invested in. But I think as we go forward, we also have to remember there's 1.8 million people in this country that don't drive. Often people who have aged to the point that they're not allowed to drive anymore. So when we're making transport decisions in rural Ireland, we should be making them also with a view to those people who maybe can't use their cars anymore. And that's why I think significant investment in rural transport is also the way forward. And Damien, the last one, if I may, are we seriously at another debate's end and we haven't raised the issue of our times, which is climate change, and we're drawing to the close again, and I fear there's going to be a throwaway question about climate change, and it really is. It requires we have a decade of action ahead of us. It has to be radical, transformative, deep action, and again, we're on the hind tit in terms of waiting up until the last few minutes. And I know that we actually have the Sinn Féin spokesperson on climate. I'm sure he'd be interested in getting in on it as well. It shouldn't be the last thing we talk about. It should be the first thing we talk about, and it should permeate every other government department and every other decision that we make, from our university, from our travel, from our North Quays. Everything is going to have to be viewed through the prism of the climate change action that we need to take.
Well, I was going to bring it up in the context of the next question, which is farming, and the issue of climate change with that. And it's one of the issues that we were and are due to discuss.
Yeah, Edmund Phelan, Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association. Last summer, the number of flights surpassed 230,000 a day. There's thousands of millions of cars on the road every day. So it's about time that the government and the powers to be stop demonising agriculture as if it was the enemy and it was the cause. Worldwide, agriculture causes 10% of emissions. You have to tackle the 90%. That's what you have to tackle, not demonise the 10%.
Okay, specifically
Thanks.
then on that, Marc Ó Cathasaigh.
No, very good, Ken. And Edmund and I know each other. Edmund came to one of our stakeholders meetings, and we've a pretty decent relationship. Edmund, I would say that it's not about tackling the 10% or the 90%, it's about tackling the 100%. I think every single sector is going to have to make movement. I think farmers, far from demonising farmers, I think the Green Party have strongly put forward the idea that farming is a huge part of the solution. But the current farming model, I know that you're in beef, the current farming model is not working. We know that there's 60% of the farmers in Kerry who are in beef. They don't have a succession. The next generation is not looking to go into it. So at the minute, the intensification model means that really what we're getting is large-scale, intense factory farming. We would like to bring that back to small family farms. I think small family farms, they're the lifeblood of our communities in this county and across the country. So I think they have to be rewarded, not just for the product they push out, but also the environmental services. We've talked to you before, you know, things like carbon sequestration, things about the biodiversity services. These are things that you don't make money from. In fact, if you choose to do those things right now in the current model, you're going to lose money. And I don't think that's the way we want to see family farming go.
John Cummins.
But I do think that farmers do feel demonised. I've been meeting farmers right across Waterford, from Tallow all the way down to East Waterford, around Ballymacaw, and they do feel hurt. They do feel that they are being picked on. And we have to remember that for every €1 that a farmer makes, €4 is spent in the local economy. And they have led the exports from this country. They have led a revival, and the agri-food sector to Waterford is probably more important percentage-wise than any other county in Ireland.
And they do have to, they do
have to be protected, and I don't think there's enough people speaking about that. They're not afraid of change, and they do want to play their part, like Mark said, but they feel as if they are being victimised as a result of pressure that has been put on by the Green Party and by the media
that's untrue. The Green Party haven't put pressure. And the other thing is the framing of the question, because as Edmund was saying, the farmers may feel demonised or victimised, but even the framing of the question, we've seen everything that's been brought forward about climate change has been framed, even on the national debates, been framed in terms of suckler herd or herd reduction or things like that.
You've made that point. You're
so
not
the framing
demonising.
is there.
David Cullinane, briefly, please.
Well, first of all, climate action is a massive issue. It's a big challenge facing all of us. It won't be solved through more taxes. It will be solved by giving people alternatives, by enabling people to make changes, investments in public transport. I would completely agree that farming is not the enemy when it comes to climate change. We're very fortunate that we have some of the best farming practices here in this country and the world. We produce some of the best beef, some of the best dairy products. We have a very strong agri-base here in this region. Look at traceability and all of the things that Irish farmers led the way on. And they are the custodians of our land. There are a number of things which we could do to help farmers in relation to climate action. We know that hedgerows, planting of trees, different types of crops for biofuels, they are things that we can do. But if we come at this and we see farmers as the enemy and farming as the enemy, I think we're making a big mistake, because we have to be practical and realistic about how we achieve our climate action targets. It won't be the Greens Party proposal of more taxes. It will be to actually empower people and facilitate people to make the changes that they want to make.
But on that,
assembly,
one of the key agreements in the Citizens Assembly is that 100% of them agreed we must bring the community with us. This demoralising of the farmers is more of the rural-urban divide. The farmers must be brought the journey. There's roughly 140,000 farmers in Ireland making a living. We have a very efficient beef-producing mechanism here in Ireland. It must be taken more on a global scale in a comparison to what's actually being produced in Europe, and we must work forward. I agree with David insofar as hedgerows are not being taken into account. We must look at farmers the possibility of growing more hedgerow, and instead of putting stakes down, we grow, say, trees where the stakes in. But the farmers must be brought the journey. They're not being engaged in relation to this, and I firmly believe we must engage and bring them the journey.
I want you to come back in a second, Mark. Ronan, quickly.
So I would believe that Aontú is actually now the party of the farmers. We introduced an equitable price beefing bill there in the Dáil before Christmas, which would stop the sub-cost selling of Irish beef. But we weren't allowed any airtime in this. But I was also just like to ask Mark of the Greens, would he increase tax on a bag of coal? And also, does he agree with Eamon Ryan, his leader, when he says that he believes there should only be one car per 10 families in rural Ireland?
Una Dunphy, before Mark comes back on that.
Yeah, we would appreciate what the Green Party say with regard to bringing farmers along and compensating farmers for changing their way and transitioning. We would have problems with the management of beef at the moment, as we would have been talking to the beef plan movement and they would have spoken. And well, they would have highlighted the problems that there are with the production of beef and how the money is going into the production, the producers and the companies rather than the farmers themselves. And we would like to see them more empowered to get the money that they're due.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to come back briefly? You want to take one more
Yeah,
question
I want to
from
come
John
up
Rowan there?
on plenty of it. With regard to the carbon tax, that's not specifically a Green Party policy. That was actually a recommendation of the Joint Oireachtas Committee, and actually all parties are tied into it. And really what we should be doing with carbon pricing, it shouldn't be like the €5 on the pension or whatever that comes around every time there's an election. Carbon pricing needs to be moved to a multi-annual model with agreement from across the parties. In fact, there is broad agreement. Also, the carbon tax that currently exists is not as suggested by the Green Party. So the carbon tax as it currently exists, which is being paid into general taxation, that's in fact a Fine Gael model. We want to pay it into a ring-fenced area for a carbon cashback so that people get the the money straight back out of it. And in fact, it's been tested with the SRI. It's been found to be socially progressive rather than the current model, which is socially regressive. So coming back to what Ronan said, that means the person who is forced to put the bag of coal onto the fire, at least they are getting the cash back. We're not paying
And car
that money.
sharing?
Oh, on car sharing, that was suggested as an add-on optional. The idea being, and it's worked very well in Kinmare, it's worked very well in Clare. It should work very well in Tremor, for example, where there's 1,400 journeys in that Tremor road every day, and our average occupancy rate is 1.1. Why don't we meet at the church car park and we take the four of us take the one car and we save them money?
I'll let you know that in a second. Lads. I want John Rowan here.
Hello, John Rowan, auctioneer. My question is for David Cullinane and Mary Butler, but David, you're here, so. David, I just want to talk about the past, right? Des Purcell and I would meet new companies coming into Waterford, okay? What lobbying have you done to attract new business into our city? What have you done? What can you say? What jobs are you're trying to get into Waterford? Because we need jobs. And I'd like to know what you have done and what Mary Butler had done in the last term.
Okay, and as David is mulling over that, Richard Hurley.
Richard Hurley, Granville Hotel. Given the economic potential of tourism to the city and to the county, a simple question. If elected, would you lobby to restore the VAT rate to 9%, based on over 90,000 jobs have been created since 2011, and how vital tourism is to the growth of the city and county?
Okay, I wanted a specific question there. I want to get everybody in on this, so if you can just keep it around 30 seconds to a minute, okay?
Okay, well, first of all, to John, I haven't been in government, but as an opposition TD, I've met Enterprise Ireland and the IDA, I would say at least 20 times since I was elected to the Dáil. And I have done my best to lobby them for more jobs, but what I want to look at now is the future and what I can do and what I can achieve. I want to be in government. I want my party to be in government. I understand the transition that this city and county needs to make. We were very, very good as a city with manufacturing jobs, a lot of which were lost over the last 10, 20 years. We have to look at becoming a university city, looking at jobs in technology, in the pharmaceutical sector, getting the graduates to come through, and then making sure that we're fit for purpose here, which I believe we are, to attract in quality jobs, good quality jobs for this region. It's about delivering for Waterford. It's about delivering quality jobs, and it's about knowing how to do it, knowing what the needs of the people of Waterford are, and then being able to get those jobs and the enterprise agency to deliver.
And how are you going to be in government when the other two parties say they're not going to go into government with you?
Well, I think everybody, including the two bigger parties, have gotten a bit of a shock that at the start of this campaign they thought this was going to be about Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I don't think the opinion polls have escaped you over the last. Well, I don't think the opinion polls have escaped you over the last number of days, Damien. The people will decide. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will have their views on Sinn Féin, but the people are hungry for change. They want something different. Since the foundation of this state, we've had Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael-led governments.
Okay.
It's about time we had something different. We're offering that something different. We're offering change, and I can tell you, I will be fighting for my party to be in government so that I can be not just a voice, but somebody who can actually do things and deliver the things that these guys promised over the last 10 years but didn't deliver.
John Cummins, specific questions regarding what John and Richard said.
Specifically in relation to Enterprise Ireland and IDA, like David, I have met with them. I have met with individual companies. I have also supported in my 2 terms as mayor, in particular, in meeting client companies that have actually invested in Waterford, like Nipro, Airgen. Their jobs that are on the ground here, Sun Life, they've delivered significant increases in high-paying jobs. I, as mayor at that time, engaged with all of those. In relation to Richard on the VAT rate, it's a very difficult one, Richard. As you know, we lowered the VAT rate in order to stimulate growth in the area. It did go back up because it was only ever a temporary measure. If there was an ability to have different rates for different regions, that is certainly something that I would support. I don't know if that is possible, but certainly Dublin is different to the rest of the country. country.
Okay, Eddie Mulligan.
Just in relation to lobbying, I can't answer for my colleague, but personally over the last number of years I've done extensive lobbying, and to give you an idea, too much of my lobbying is actually trying to keep companies in Waterford and have the confidence, and in the last 18 months I would have met 3 companies and their landlords who are still trading here in Waterford. In relation to attracting business, one business that hasn't opened yet, they were going to Kilkenny, I chased them to Kilkenny through information was up, they bought a property and are opening in the new year in Waterford. In relation to the main city centre shopping area, I've met with multiple companies pointed out by auctioneers like yourselves, and I've engaged with them to show them the way forward for Waterford. In relation to Richard's question in relation to VAT, when the proposal for increasing the VAT from 9 to 13, I made an extensive proposal to Fianna Fáil. I firmly believe the South and South East hasn't recovered. In relation to Brexit, in the last 12 months I've had lots of representation.
So you're saying a different VAT rate for the South East?
No, I think we needed to look at different models of how we needed to achieve it, because certainly within the South East we are not trading economically as well as we should, and as we're facing into Brexit, from people who engage with me, they're looking at
Your party's not recommending.
UK bookings are down 25%, their turnovers of consequences down 20%. It is something that needs to be seriously looked at, is revisit, and I certainly, if elected, will be lobbying to look at a new model in relation to reducing the VAT to 9%.
Una Dunphy, please.
With the VAT?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't reduce the VAT anymore. It was done on a temporary basis, and we have seen recovery in other hotels. Obviously, in the region, it needs to be addressed with regard to how we treat tourism and try and get it to bump up. How we do that, I think, would be looking at how we develop the 2040 plan, which we had our own one, and it would go with the North Quays development, bringing in other areas rather than just the areas that are touched on at the moment.
Marc Ó Cathasaigh.
Thank you. I suppose on the VAT rate, Richard, I suppose I should be more political and give you a more palatable answer, but no, there's no specific recommendations in our manifesto to reduce that VAT rate again. So there's no concrete proposals at the minute. In terms of, I suppose, lobbying for business, well, I've been in the chamber, in the council a wet week, I suppose, since May, so I couldn't give you a very extensive track record in that. But one thing that I think that we should be looking at into the future, there's been a Green New Deal just announced in Europe, and there's very, very significant amount of money being made available for essentially the development of a green new economy. Now, I'm looped into that obviously through Grace O'Sullivan, who's been kind of tipping me off on it, but there is massive opportunity, particularly in Waterford, which has got a great solar resource and great potential to develop renewables. I think if we get a good start on it and start looking at things, I know Eddie has talked about making public transport free around the city, I think there's huge potential to start drawing on that fund and start building towards a green economy in Waterford.
Ronan?
No, just with regards to tourism and attracting more tourists, I think we have to get a carrier for the airport. The airport is now dormant at the moment, and it's been promise after promise for years after years. If we get a carrier and start bringing more people into the southeast, and also preventing people of Waterford not having to travel to Dublin or Cork to travel abroad, but also I think people have to realise now, Ireland is actually the only native English-speaking country in the EU at the moment, and we have to play that to our advantage. And big corporations, they want to do business here. We have good tax rates, we have settled property laws, and we have to play that to our advantage. And if we build it, they will come, and businesses will come. And if we open up the airport, businesses will come to Waterford.
10 seconds.
And we are going to do that because the runway extension is going to be starting in the summer.
You don't have a carrier yet,
But
John.
we did gloss over the agriculture issue, and I think the most important thing is that there has to be a common agricultural policy negotiated this year, and I don't think there's a party that's better placed than Fine Gael in order to do that, Damien. And it's very, very important that we try and introduce a policy similar to what was there previously with REPs in order to support the sustainable movement towards, and to take what David said in terms of custodians of the land.
So you agree with him, so maybe you could work together. Would you go into government with him?
That won't be a decision for me.
Would you go into government with him?
No, Damien, because of what I just said in relation to the taxation policy.
Eddie Mulligan, would you go into government?
I think they're going to drive jobs
would you go into
out
government
of
with Sinn
Ireland.
Féin?
That's what Sinn Féin are
Ultimately,
going to
the decision would be for Fianna Fáil members. But me personally, I will go into government with anybody that will work in Waterford's better interests. And at the moment, I do work with Sinn Féin members.
So you would. So if you get elected, you go against party policy.
Again, it would be down to the members to vote on, and I would be one of the members voting on whether we go into government.
Ronan Cleary,
supporting that.
Ronan Cleary,
I'm not speaking for Fianna Fáil. I'm speaking.
Well,
for
I
Eddie
thought you were
Mulligan
standing
as
as a general election candidate for Fianna Fáil.
Yes, and I said I stated what Fianna Fáil policy is, but I also stated that for me personally, it will go to the membership of Fianna Fáil.
Ronan Cleary, Aontú, David Cullinane, Sinn Féin, John Cummins, Fine Gael, Una Dunphy, People Before Profit, Eddie Mulligan, Fianna Fáil, Marc Ó Cathasaigh, Green Party, and everybody in the audience. Big round of applause, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today. On behalf of everybody and the listeners, for all 11 candidates, the best of luck to everybody. As somebody said, anybody puts their name on the ballot paper, the best of luck to you all. We'll see you on Sunday. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien.
WLR, IMRO Local Station of the Year.
WLR.